Initiated: dreams, depression, delusions, UAP, shadow people, psychosis, and sleep paralysis. By Matthew Roberts. The views and opinions expressed herein by the author do not represent the policies or position of the United States Department of Defense or the United States Navy, and are the sole responsibility of the author. Quote, "The passage of this book to those ready for the instruction will attract the attention of such as are prepared to receive the teaching. And likewise, when the pupil is ready to receive the truth, then will this little book come to him or her. Such is the law." The Kabbalion. Quote, "There are many who are called, but few who become Bakoi." Plato. Chapter 1. The Call to Adventure and Refusal of the Call. As I sit down and begin to write this book about my experiences involving what people currently describe as aliens and the paranormal, I wonder where or how I can begin to describe the indescribable. I know that no matter what words I put on paper, I can never do it the justice it deserves. I have beginnings and endings rolling through my mind. Life is full of them. Endless cycles of beginnings and endings that at times unexpectedly come crashing through your life like a wrecking ball through a brick wall. We prefer the kinder and gentler beginnings, such as the birth of a child or a wedding, while shielding ourselves from life's harsher moments. But if we don't view them both equally as the gifts that they are, then we have lost something very precious that we may never regain. It is through the chaos of the wrecking ball that we discover who we really are. And it is in both the gentler and the harsher moments that we should apply that knowledge of self. We tell these stories of beginnings and endings as cycles of the hero in human mythology. If we could see through to all of the veiled truths hidden in this mythology spanning the ages of human existence, we would begin to understand how to live our lives, who and what we are. Who among us hasn't envisioned themselves as the hero? It is the hero myth playing constantly in the background of the human subconscious that keeps us reaching ever onward and upward for that which lies just beyond our grasp. The myths teach us that the hero endures great hardship on their journey to becoming the savior. We speak of freedom a lot here in the United States, yet so few of us have actually experienced freedom or can even wrap our minds around what this concept actually means. One can never know freedom unless they have known the shackles of bondage. One can never know pleasure without the knowledge of pain. I know there can be no beginnings without endings, no life without death. It is an inescapable and very painful truth. Even as mild-mannered, level-headed, and emotionally stable as I thought I was, I think about the person I once was and will never be again, full of hate and anger, consumed by fear. I now see that for what it was. A lifelong journey to the knowledge of self, to my center. Know thyself is a rather famous saying and was inscribed on the wall at the ancient Greek temple of Delphi. Just like the word freedom, it is an enigma that almost nobody truly understands. The mythologic hero understands these seemingly simple words on a level that transcends the human condition and mortal existence. Through knowledge of self, he transcends it all, becoming a living God, experiencing a liberation and a freedom that few of us have actually known. In the beginning of 2017, I knew what I was doing and where I was going. I was sure that I had life figured out. My hubris was about to be exposed in the most humiliating, painful, and terrifying ways as I learned the truth of what it means to be human. In understanding this truth, and the immense responsibility that truth carries with it, I know that I can never again partake of any feast of hate, anger, or fear. I can never again allow these toxins entrance to my soul. It is the heaviest of burdens and the greatest of blessings. These days I approach burdens and blessings as I approach pleasure or pain. I embrace them as one and the same. I do so without reservation or judgment, head on from the refuge of my tower of inner strength and wisdom, while doing my best to lead a life of grace and virtue. So many of us are lost at sea, drifting aimlessly, tossed about by the storms of life, our vision clouded by the fog of emotion. There are always beacons of light showing us the way home. If we would only bother to lift our heads and search the horizon of our inner being for them. My goal in writing this book is that it may act as such a beacon, guiding you home, calling you home through the darkness of the storm. For me, the words of the most famous of beacons takes on a much deeper meaning. A meaning in word and physical form that too few of us have known. She stands as testament to the powerful myth playing in the collective human subconscious. Standing as a rock in the storm, with her crown of golden light and a mortal torch of fire held high, she says, quote, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door." Unquote. I currently live and work in Washington, D.C. It is a capital city of a nation that possesses this beacon of wisdom that we don't understand. And I worry that we will never live up to what it truly represents. Many of us learn this poem in school, and we see her form in images without ever understanding that there is a much deeper meaning that has to do with the true nature of the universe in this great statue of ours. A terrifying, dangerous, and beautiful truth. I see tour buses constantly touring the city, and I wonder what future tour groups will see hundreds or thousands of years from now. And what will their guides tell them about this place as they gaze on whatever remains of our capital? Two possibilities come to mind. I've been all over the world on these types of tours, and the story is the same no matter what the ancient city. Quote, "This is where it ended. There once was a great, wealthy, and powerful civilization that existed here, and these are the ruins of their once thriving capital city. They succumbed to their own greed and fear, destroying their civilization from the inside out." Unquote. I wonder if this is what will be said of this city one day. Some may say it's inevitable. I can envision a second possibility. A tour guide leading a group through the city saying, quote, "This is where it began. The events that transpired here are why humanity now exists as a tower of strength and a beacon of light in the universe. The spark that lit the fire of the soul of humanity was struck here, and these are the ruins of that city." Unquote. No doubt there will be those who dismiss my work as the ramblings of a madman, led through delusion by the noxious fumes of swamp gas, light phenomenon through temperature inversion, ball lightning, and weather balloons that came together in a perfect storm within my bedroom to bring you this work. Nonetheless, I am going to share with you my experiences. Along the way, I will point out others that have had the same experiences throughout the history of humanity, giving us our rich history of religion and mythology that at times has been misguided at best and weaponized at its worst. In doing so, I hope to instill in you the gravity and seriousness of the matter at hand. In giving you examples, my desire is that you will take a closer look and begin to scratch the surface of this for yourself. In doing so, you will become a quester of truth, and will see that everything I experienced, as disturbing as it may seem to some, is supported by fact. A truth that resides in our stories of fiction and myth. I began playing some music to set the mood as I began to write. Heaven by Angels and Airwaves was the first song that popped up. Heaven has become one of my new favorite songs, and I listen to it often. Some of the imagery in the unofficial music video is what I picture when I think about my favorite mythology from ancient Greece. For me, what comes to mind is the natural beauty of the poplar tree and its uses in mythology. Specifically, what comes to mind is the quaking aspen, or Populus tremula. It is a poplar that is prevalent in North America and can be found growing in some of nature's most beautiful and striking landscapes. Places like Crested Butte, Colorado. If you look up images of the quaking aspen, you will see what I mean. The autumn landscape of rocky outcroppings, high in the mountains covered in these white-barked trees and yellow leaves. It arouses in the mind the air of an inspired fairy tale. It seems as though these trees must have been placed in this landscape to remind us of what heaven must look like. The quaking aspen gets its name from the way its leaves seem to tremble noisily with fear in the slightest of shifting breezes. To the ancient Greeks, however, the poplar tree was viewed quite differently. In ancient Greece, the wind was said to carry the messages of the gods. When the wind would blow, the poplar's leaves would become excited as the tree tuned in to receive its divine correspondence. Hercules was given a crown made of poplar at the end of his hero's journey, symbolic of his successful struggle to transcend the human condition and become divine. The goddess Persephone, who was the queen of the underworld, kept a poplar grove outside the gates to the underworld, symbolic of the divinity that awaits those who successfully return from their treacherous descent into the underworld. The true beauty of this tree is not just visual. As a living organism, it's equally stunning. The tree has the ability to prune itself, giving its very clean, manicured appearance. Its bark is capable of photosynthesis, enabling it to produce food for itself even in the dead of winter. It's incredibly resilient and recovers quickly from forest fires. The key to this resiliency is hidden underground in its root system. It may seem that these trees are individual living organisms at a glance above ground. Underground, however, it is revealed that a forest of these trees is in fact a single living organism that is connected through a large knot of interconnected roots. The ancient Greeks knew this, and it's why they used it in their mythology. To them, the poplar represented natural perfection, independence, fearlessness, and beauty, all encapsulated in this divine plant. To the ancient Greeks, it represented everything humanity was capable of becoming. There is a Greek myth concerning the Greek goddess Persephone, who kept poplars outside the gates of the underworld. It is a story of how she became the queen of the underworld. I recently came across this ancient Greek myth in the form of a famous hymn. It was written in the same poetic style and form as the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer. It is called the Homeric Hymn to Demeter, and I feel it fits perfectly in the beginning of this book. To understand the journey, one must be familiar with this myth. The myth's importance in the hero's journey is the reason this story was central to the ancient Greek mysteries. They were known as the Eleusinian Mysteries, as they were practiced at the temple to Demeter in Eleusis, Greece, at the foot of the Acropolis. As there were in many cultures throughout the world, the mysteries were schools that individuals were initiated into. They were central to the Greek religious experience. The Homeric hymn to Demeter concerns the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. To the ancient Greeks, Demeter was goddess of vegetation, harvest, sacred law, and the cycle of life and death. Demeter and Persephone were immortal goddesses that were always depicted as very beautiful young women with soft feminine features. Despite these depictions, Persephone's name in ancient Greek means the destroyer and bringer of death. Some of the inhabitants of ancient Greece dared not speak her name out of the fear that they might summon death to their doorstep. In the Homeric hymn to Demeter, Persephone is out picking and admiring flowers with the daughters of Okeanos on the plain of Nysa. She picks roses, crocus, violets, irises, and the hyacinth. She comes across the narcissus flower, which was purposely designed by Gaia, the goddess of the earth, to be so beautiful that Persephone would be distracted by its beauty. It was Hades, the god of the underworld, that directed Gaia to construct such a flower. All of this was done with the blessing of Zeus, the king of the gods and Persephone's father, who had agreed to the plan of Hades' abduction of Persephone. As she is distracted while gazing on the beauty of the narcissus flower, Hades grabs Persephone from his chariot, drawn by undead horses. Persephone screams in her immortal voice as she is abducted, but none of the other immortals or mortals hear her scream, except Hecate and Helios. The goddess Hecate was the goddess of magic, witchcraft, night, moon, ghosts, and necromancy. Helios was the god of the sun, guardian of oaths, and keeper of human and immortal sight. Hades brings Persephone to the underworld to be his wife. Persephone had hope that she would one day see her mother again, as she continued to call out in her immortal voice that resounded throughout the world. Persephone's mother, Demeter, heard her daughter's cries and was stricken with grief. Distraught by the disappearance of her daughter, she puts on a dark cloak and sets out to find her beloved Persephone. For 9 days she wanders, and nobody can tell her what has happened to her daughter. In her grief, she does not partake of ambrosia, the immortal nectar of the gods, and refuses to bathe her body in water. On the 10th day of grieving, Hecate comes to Demeter with torch in hand and asks Demeter which one of the gods or mortals has taken Persephone. Hecate explains that she heard Persephone cry out, but did not see who abducted her. Together, Demeter and Hecate set out to visit the god Helios, the seeing eye of gods and men. When they arrive, Demeter asks Helios who has taken her daughter. Helios tells Demeter that Persephone was abducted by Hades with the blessing of Zeus. Demeter is devastated by the news. Even though Helios tells her it's not that bad, In her grief, Demeter shuns the company of the other gods on Olympus. Instead, she wanders the earth, visiting various mortal cities, disguised as an old woman. The disguised Demeter ends up in Eleusis, where she rests near a well along the road that leads to the house of the Lord of Eleusis. As the disguised Demeter sits under the shade of an olive tree, the Lord's 4 daughters come to the well. The daughters ask this old woman who she is and why she's wandered so far from the city. The disguised Demeter tells the girls her name is Doso. She tells the 4 daughters she is from Crete, but that she was kidnapped from there by pirates. The ship she was on with these pirates was beached on the shores of Thoricos. There the ship was boarded by many women from the mainland. The disguised Demeter tells the Lord's daughters that she escaped as the pirates began preparing dinner next to the beached ship. She then wandered and was unsure where she was exactly. She told the girls she was looking for a house with children in which she could do a woman's work. The daughters invite the disguised Demeter to the palace to care for their baby brother Demophon. Demophon was not well, as he was born to their older mother. Demeter assists the girls in filling jars of water from the well, and they proceed to the palace. When they reach the palace, the daughters rush into the chamber where their mother is seated with Demophon in her lap. Demeter waits in the entryway, wearing her dark cloak and a veil over her face. Her head nearly touches the ceiling, and the dark entryway is bathed in her divine light. When the Lady of Eleusis sees the disguised Demeter, she is struck with a sense of awe and holy wonder. The lady offers the disguised Demeter her splendid seat. Demeter refuses the splendid chair and instead sits on a stool. Demeter sat on this stool for a long time and made no attempt to speak. She sat depressed, thinking about her daughter Persephone, with her eyes cast down at the floor. An old woman, Iambe, came along and started making many jokes with Demeter. This made Demeter laugh and turned her mood in another direction. From that point on, Iambe became a part of Demeter's sacred rites performed at her temple in Eleusis. The Lady of Eleusis offered Demeter a cup with honey-sweet wine, but the disguised Demeter refused the wine, claiming that it was divinely ordained that she not drink red wine. Instead, Demeter asked for some water and barley with pennyroyal to drink. The Lady of Eleusis prepares this drink for the disguised Demeter. The Lady of Eleusis then tells Demeter that she has the appearance of having been born to nobility. The lady asks the disguised Demeter to care for her son who was not well. The disguised Demeter tells the lady she will care for him, and she has the perfect antidote for Demophon. The goddess Demeter begins to care for the boy with her immortal hands, and his family is amazed at how well the boy is progressing under the care of this old woman. The boy was growing like a daemon. His parents looked on him as they would look on the gods. The secret to his amazing recovery was that Demeter, still disguised as an old woman, decided to turn Demophon into an immortal god. She did this to repay the family for their kindness towards her. Secretly, she had been delivering the boy rites by bathing him in ambrosia, and placing Demophon into a fire to burn like a log every night, burning away his mortal soul. Demeter is discovered by the Lady of Eleusis as she burns Demophon in the fire one night. The Lady of Eleusis reacts badly to this sight and screams. Demeter becomes angry at the response of the boy's mother and decides to reveal herself as the goddess Demeter. She chides the boy's mother for behaving like a silly mortal, and for being unable to tell the difference from good fortune and bad. She tells the lady she would have made the boy an immortal god, but the boy will now only be immortal for a short time, just by virtue of having sat in her lap and slept in her immortal arms. Because the boy's mother had interrupted the process, Demeter was forced to halt the ritual, and the action could not be undone. Demeter proclaims that from now until the end of time, the son of Eleusis will have a great battle among themselves at the right time every year. Demeter then demands that a temple be erected to her, the goddess Demeter, at the foot of the Acropolis. She then shed her dark robes and old age. She was enveloped in beauty as her divine light shone like a bolt of lightning, illuminating the entire palace. The lady of Eleusis fell to her knees at the sight of Demeter in all her glory, forgetting all about her son. The 4 daughters ran downstairs from their chambers and grabbed Demophon. They began washing him as he gasped and sputtered. They hugged him, but he could not be comforted, because he was now being held by nursemaids who were far inferior. The family prayed all night to the goddess Demeter, as they trembled with fear. The next morning, the lord of Eleusis gathered his people and explained what had happened. He informed them that they had to build a temple to the goddess Demeter, as she had demanded. The people obeyed and built her temple. Demeter remained at this temple for a year. During this year of her absence from Olympus, the human race suffered dearly, as did Demeter in the grief over her daughter Persephone. Demeter, the nurturer of the earth, was absent from her divine duties. No seeds grew. There was no harvest. The people of the earth were starving. Zeus noticed what was happening and sent different gods from Olympus to offer gifts to Demeter if she would just return to Olympus. But she refused. She stated that she would only return if she could see her daughter Persephone. Zeus then dispatches Hermes, the messenger and scribe of the gods, to the underworld to retrieve Persephone, who was in great pain at the hands of Hades. Hermes tells Hades that Zeus requests Persephone be set free. Hades gives up Persephone and tells her to go to her mother. But before he lets her leave, Hades gives Persephone a pomegranate seed to eat. Hades did this because when one eats in the underworld, they must return, and he did not want Persephone to leave forever. He wanted her to return. Persephone then climbs into a chariot with Hermes, and they head for Demeter, who is at her temple in Eleusis. When Hermes and Persephone arrive in Eleusis, Persephone rushes to her mother, telling her everything that had transpired. She tells her mother that she was about to leave the underworld when Hades gave her a pomegranate seed and compelled her to eat it, but that she did not want to. When Demeter asked her how she came to be abducted by Hades, Persephone states that she was out in the meadows picking flowers with the daughters of Okeanos. She picked many flowers, including narcissus. As she did this, the ground opened up underneath her and Hades grabbed her. She explained to her mother that he then took her down into the underworld against her will. Persephone and Demeter spent the rest of the day happily enjoying each other's company. Hecate, the goddess of magic, witchcraft, night, moon, ghost, and necromancy, welcomed Persephone back with many embraces. From that day forward, Hecate became Persephone's attendant and substitute queen of the underworld. Zeus then dispatched his mother, Rhea, to bring Demeter back to the company of the gods at Olympus. Zeus tells Rhea that she is to inform Demeter that her daughter Persephone must spend 1/3 of the year in the underworld, and the other 2/3 of the year would be spent in the company of Demeter and the other gods in Olympus. Before Rhea arrived at the fields of Eleusis near Demeter's temple, they were barren and dead, but began to flourish as soon as Rhea arrived, like springtime. Soon the fields were overflowing with grain. Demeter and Rhea rejoiced in each other's company. Rhea asked Demeter to come back to Olympus and to make the harvest for the humans, and so Demeter obeyed. Immediately she set up the harvest, and all was well. Demeter then showed the human people how to perform the rites and rituals at her temple so they could deliver them correctly for themselves. The holy ritual could not be ignored and was not to be spoken of. Fear of the gods would hold back any speaking out. Blessed is he who among the earthbound has seen these things. But he who is uninitiated into these rites and takes no part in them will not in death receive the things the initiates do. When Demeter finished her instructions, she and Persephone returned to Olympus, where they abided at the side of Zeus. Blessed is he whom they, Demeter and Persephone, being kind, decide to love among earthbound mortals. To him they send riches to reside in his hearth. Today's scholars read this mythology as a way that the ancients poetically spoke of the changing of the seasons. But it's so much more than that. As with all Greek mythology, it is in fact meant to teach. This hymn was one of 33 Homeric hymns. The Eleusinian mysteries were known as one of the greater mysteries. The would-be initiates had to graduate from the lesser mysteries before continuing on to the greater mysteries. The truth of these mysteries were known only to its initiates and was never written down. All initiates had to be sponsored by a previous initiate who would remain at their side throughout the 9-month experience. In the temple to Demeter at Eleusis, there was an area where sacred artifacts were kept. They were only to be viewed and handled by initiates. There are accounts of children hopping the fence to the compound and viewing these objects. If discovered, they were immediately sentenced to death. As I write this, I believe the reason for this is that these artifacts were in fact artifacts of the gods. The Knights Templar knew of this, and it's what drove them to seek true religious artifacts all over the world. The same was true for the Nazis, and they understood that these artifacts could be technological and powerful in nature. Some would argue the mysteries were practiced in Greece for some 2,000 years. Greek art found around Eleusis concerning the Eleusinian mysteries depicts an initiate standing between Demeter and Persephone as they hold torches to him. It depicts the pain of initiation and the burning away of the mortal soul. Plutarch was a priest at the Temple of Delphi in ancient Greece. The Temple of Delphi was the seat of the oracle, a female priestess the Greek people would consult on matters of life. Despite the threat of death, Plutarch did leave a limited description of the mysteries. Quote, "The candidates were made to roam through winding subterranean passages. It was a peregrination through the dark, a journey to an invisible end, which put to the test all one's presence of mind. And then, at the moment of decision, the initiates were subjected to terrors. They experienced shudders and trembling. They sweated with fear and were paralyzed with terror, until light was gradually admitted and the day restored. With sacred chants and dancing choruses, a magnificent place opened before them. The initiated was crowned with garlands, and by the side of pure and holy men, he enjoyed the festival of rebirth." Unquote. The Romans had their own version of the mysteries that they borrowed from the Greeks, which were celebrated during the Saturnalia festival. Later, these mysteries became the Gnostic mysteries and made it into the Bible in the form of the book of Revelation. Its counterpart in India is a book called the Bhagavad Gita, in the Hindu religious text known as the Mahabharata. In Egypt, it was known as the Book of the Dead. I will break all of this down later in the book. The mysteries were always practiced around the world at the same time of year, beginning around the autumnal equinox, with the harvest moon, through the winter solstice, and ending in the spring. The mysteries were practiced in Mesopotamia, Göbekli Tepe, ancient Egypt, Asia, Australia, and even North and South America. I make this assertion based on some of the mythology of these cultures, as well as iconography and artifacts that have been unearthed. I see evidence that they were practiced worldwide and always around the same time of year. One could argue that these mysteries have been practiced by humanity for at least the past 13,000 years. I would argue, however, that some of the cave paintings of early man also depicted some of this same iconography, dating back to at least 30,000 to 40,000 years. As we will see, these traditions go back even farther than 30,000 to 40,000 years, and I would speculate many hundreds of thousands of years. I don't seek to rewrite the many books that are out there that I know to be the true treasures of humanity. Instead, I seek to share with you my own journey in the hopes it will act as a catalyst for yours. In this book, I have embellished nothing. If anything, I have left some things out, as hard as it may be to believe. All of this actually happened to me. I was never regressed or put under hypnosis to remember any of this. As you read this book leading up to September and then the winter solstice, I encourage you to put it down and read the books I read along my journey. The most important advice I can give is that you isolate yourself to the extent that you can with these books. Don't concern yourself with others. Turn your gaze inward. Turn off your TV. As we have already learned in the Homeric hymn to Demeter, if one eats or is distracted while in the underworld, they must return. While writing this little bit of the introduction, I found myself unable to sleep late one night. I turned on the TV and started flipping through channels. I came across a movie that was just starting called 2010, The Year We Make Contact. It's the sequel to 2001, A Space Odyssey. The main character finds himself once again heading back to the mysterious monolith that was discovered orbiting Jupiter. Throughout 2001 and 2010, there is an air of tension mixed with a creepy uneasiness. In 2010, the main character has a run-in with a character named Bowman, who disappeared into the monolith during the first movie and was presumed dead. Bowman appears to various characters in seemingly paranormal ways. He appears as an old man, a baby, and as himself at the time he disappeared. He warns the characters repeatedly that the characters on the ships around Jupiter must leave the orbit of Jupiter in 2 days. When pressed on what is going to happen in 2 days, Bowman simply replies, "Something wonderful." It was the end of September 2017. After a brush with death in the form of a massive saddle pulmonary embolism, I was being discharged from the hospital. I hadn't shaven in a week. As I looked at my reflection in the hospital bathroom mirror, I noticed that I had 2 bald spots on my neck and chin where I was no longer growing facial hair. It looked ridiculous. While I stood there in my hospital gown, shaving with the awful disposable razor they gave me, I examined the spots with a deep sigh and thought, what is this? These are the scars I'm left with after all of this, I suppose. I felt a little silly to worry about the spots. It seemed so vain, considering I easily could have died. The odd part about everything I had just been through was that at no point was I ever worried. At no point did I ever feel like I was in danger. I somehow knew this wasn't going to kill me. Being the ever introspective person that I am, I also had a strong feeling that my life would never be the same. Not because of the seriousness of my situation, but because of something else I couldn't quite put my finger on, as I stood shaving in the mirror at that moment. But I did have this sense that something had caught up to me, and everything was about to change. Little did I know how correct this moment of intuition would turn out to be. In writing these words and thinking of what I have endured, I am becoming incredibly emotional. Thinking about the worst days that were so packed with incredible pain that my teeth were chattering and filled with so much terror that all I could manage to do was lie on the floor in the corner of my bedroom, shivering and crying like a baby. While everything I perceived to be reality was systematically shattered and crashing down around me. This is all so deeply personal and so incredibly painful that when I speak about these events, I often fall into a mess of incoherent emotion. This incident, this brush with death in the form of these blood clots, only marked the beginning of my descent into hell, where Persephone, the destroyer and bringer of death, was patiently anticipating my arrival. Standing with her mother, Demeter, torches in hand, ready to burn away my mortal soul and initiate me into the truth and beauty of what it means to be human. Quote, whenever 2 previously unrelated things are joined together, a scar, or a seam, if you will, is always the result. And when individuals are joined to previously unknown and unconscious aspects of themselves, scarring is the painful and inescapable result. It can only be ever thus. Only when one is faced with something overwhelming can the archetype of wholeness be constellated. So do not be ashamed of scars. Valorize them, caress them, trace their course in your skin and in your mind's eye. Scars are roadways drawn onto maps of flesh, leading always to the beautiful truths buried deep within oneself. Unquote. Bradley Olson, Ph.D. Cultural Mythology, Myth Blast, Scares and Scars, the Joseph Campbell Foundation. As I got ready for my discharge, the doctor that had been taking care of me walked in. "Are you ready to go home?" she asked with a smile on her face. "I am," I said in a raspy, weak voice. She was thin and young. She was wearing blue scrubs with a white lab coat and long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. "Well, I have your discharge paperwork here and I just need to go over it with you before you go. The saddle pulmonary embolism you suffered was very serious and it could happen again," she explained. "Because of this, you will have to take blood thinners for the rest of your life, which makes you non-deployable, as you will need to be stationed near a medical treatment facility at all times. Unfortunately, because of the blood thinners and the inability to deploy, your medical record is going to be submitted to a medical review board and you may not be able to continue military service, depending on the findings of the board." She paused, waiting for some reaction, but I had none. "How long have you been in the Navy?" she asked. 15 years with 10 years at sea," I said. "It would seem a shame to kick you out so close to your 20-year retirement mark, but I don't know what the board will decide. I've seen these things go either way," she said. I told her I understood and signed my discharge paperwork. As I sat waiting for my ride, I reflected on everything that led me to go to the hospital. I woke up in the middle of the night, a week prior, gasping for breath. I couldn't get air into me. I felt as though I had just been sprinting a marathon. In a panic, I threw the comforter off of me and scrambled for my phone to call for help. Before I could make it out of bed, I saw my bedroom closing in and becoming dark. I was losing consciousness, and I knew it. I started slumping over in my bed. Despite the violent surprise that woke me up, not being able to breathe, I felt a calm wash over me as my body went limp, and the room closed in. The last sensation I felt as I slumped over was a feeling of incredible peace as the left side of my face came to rest on the mattress. The next morning, I decided I should go to the emergency room on base. I was still feeling incredibly short of breath. I drove myself there thinking that this was possibly some allergy or maybe pneumonia. When I checked in at the front desk, they handed me a sheet to fill out. The sheet I was given stated that if you are short of breath, to check in with the nurse at the front desk immediately. I didn't really feel like it was necessary to make a big deal of this, so I didn't, and chose to simply list shortness of breath among the symptoms I was having. I decided it would be best to wait my turn, as there were people ahead of me who were already waiting when I arrived. I was called back by a nurse and put on a bed behind a curtain. This was an emergency room on Andrews Air Force Base, but had no hospital attached to it. After several minutes, a doctor came in and asked me about my symptoms. The doctor told me he thought I should get a CT scan of my chest and would also order some blood work. After the scan and blood test, I lay there behind this curtain awaiting some news as to what was going on. I wasn't waiting long before the doctor came in carrying a syringe. "I have some bad news and it's pretty serious, but I have to give you this injection immediately. Just lay back and relax," he said as he lifted my shirt and gave me an injection in my stomach. "You have some massive blood clots in both your lungs. This injection I am giving you is a blood thinner. There's an ambulance on the way that will transport you to the hospital. You're going to spend some time in the intensive care unit there. I want you to understand that this is serious and incredibly life-threatening, but we're going to do everything we can for you," he said. Nurses walked in with various types of equipment to hook me up to. By the time they were done, I was covered in wires and tubes of all sorts. One nurse started to give me oxygen through a tube across my nose. She explained that the oxygen levels in my blood were low, and this would help me breathe. I had been very short of breath, so this was something that I welcomed. I found it easier to breathe with the oxygen flowing and drifted off to sleep while I lay there waiting for the ambulance. I was woken when the ambulance arrived, as they unhooked all of the tubes and wires, and then hooked me up to the tubes and wires of the machines and IVs that were going to accompany me in the ambulance. I felt so stupid. Why was this happening? What had I done to myself that caused this? These were the thoughts that were running through my head as I was loaded into the ambulance. I felt embarrassed and humiliated. The hospital they were transporting me to had lost power, and we were diverted to a different hospital. The woman who was caring for me told me to just relax because the trip would be a bit longer than they expected. She kept asking me if I was comfortable. I was, but I couldn't really talk as I was wearing a mask over my face for oxygen, as opposed to the small tube across my nose. I spent my birthday that year hospitalized in the intensive care unit, recovering from the saddle pulmonary embolism that had nearly ended my life. I woke to a group of doctors examining me one morning. They explained a procedure they were going to do in which they would insert tubes into the arteries of my neck. They would then push those tubes into the arteries of my lungs and drip blood thinners directly onto the clots, extending into the primary, secondary, and tertiary arteries in both of my lungs. There was an opening just big enough to allow blood flow all the way through. I was told I was lucky to be alive, and that my recovery would be long and difficult. One doctor even told me that he'd never seen anything like this in anyone that had lived. He recounted the story of a man he was treating that died on the table right in front of him, gasping for breath. The hematologist that saw me said that there was a young lady he was caring for that had a stroke and was now in a coma, and her lungs didn't look as bad as mine. I don't remember much of my hospital stay. I mostly slept and didn't even really eat anything. I woke occasionally to see various medical professionals standing over me, pushing buttons and adjusting equipment around me. One night, a wire that was connected to a node on my chest came loose. I was awoken when a nurse came in and started pulling at the blanket I was wrapped in to get to the loose wire. I opened my eyes to the sight of a dark shadow standing at my bedside with only the light of the open door behind her partially illuminating the room. I was suddenly very uncomfortable with this. I didn't understand the reaction I was having. I was absolutely terrified as she tugged at the blankets. My heart was pounding and I had a rush of adrenaline that shot through me. I could see my heartbeat in my eyes and was beginning to see stars as I panicked and thought about how I could escape. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You're white as a sheet. Are you feeling all right?" she said as she walked around the foot of my bed, looking into my face. I lifted my hand to my face to rub the sleep out of my eyes, and I noticed it was shaking with weakness and fear. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "Can you breathe all right? Your heart rate is up there," she said. "Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I think you just scared me coming in here in the middle of the night. I'm sorry," I said. "I'm going to give you a bit more oxygen. You'll be more comfortable," she said as she walked around the room checking the machines and pushing buttons. After my discharge, I spent the next several days at home recovering and taking it easy. I began to notice an intense ringing in my ears. One of my ears was irritated, and it felt like there was water in it. I wondered if, on top of everything else, I might have an ear infection too, but I wasn't in a rush to go back to the doctor anytime soon. I found that I was hyper-paranoid at night. The slightest creak in the house, and I found I was jumping out of bed full of adrenaline and ready to fight. I recalled having a spell like this when I was a teenager. In one instance, I jumped out of bed so terrified that I grabbed a baseball bat and went down to the kitchen where I heard some rustling. I came around the corner ready to swing, but it was just my dad rummaging in the kitchen for a midnight snack. "Oh," I said as I exhaled with relief. "What, were you having a nightmare or something?" he asked, laughing as he made a sandwich. The hyperparanoia was worse this time. I was having nightmares as well. My dreams were terrifying to me. So much so that I was having difficulty sleeping. I would wake up covered in so much sweat that it looked like I had just been standing in the shower, and I would have to change my t-shirt and shorts. In one dream, I was inside a cave, hiding behind a boulder. There was a man in a white lab coat who was laughing madly as he tortured a naked woman that was chained to a table. All I could do was hide, terrified behind a rock inside the cave. In another dream, my parents were being hacked to death with an axe. This dream was really puzzling to me as my mother had passed away in 2015. I didn't understand where these dreams were coming from. They weren't me at all. Thoughts like this never occurred to me, so why was I dreaming this? I had another crazy nightmare in which I was running around my house looking for a weapon I could use to defend myself, but stopped for a moment to look at a news report on TV as it was the latest breaking news. The footage showed bodies hanging from nooses in the trees around the White House lawn. The camera panned around the scene. There were crowds running through the street with weapons, covering their faces with rags, as the air was heavy with smoke from tear gas and burning cars. When I was younger, I would have recurring dreams every night. When I was very young, perhaps in kindergarten, I would have dreams of standing barefoot in a white robe, talking to throngs of people about God on top of a mountain. I saw the Pope one night on the news, and I told my mom that I wanted to be the Pope. She laughed at me, so I kept my dreams to myself. Later, the Pope came to our town. I was watching footage of him on the local news as he walked with reporters across a grassy lawn. I could see his white shoes popping out of the bottom of his robe as he walked. I remembered feeling upset that he wore shoes. I felt like he was a fraud. I remembered asking my mother why he was wearing shoes. I again told her that I needed to be the Pope. One recurring dream that returned from my childhood was less pleasant. The dream begins with me sliding down this slope towards a cliff that looks like it's part of the Grand Canyon. I can't stop myself from sliding toward the cliff down this slope because it is too sharp of an incline and littered with small rocks, pebbles, and sand that enable my slide. When my feet reach the edge of the cliff, my body jerks and I wake up. I began to consider that this pulmonary embolism had really messed me up pretty bad. It was changing my personality. My ears were ringing, I had these bald spots on my face, and I was having terrible nightmares of unspeakable violence. People being chopped up with chainsaws and axes. I didn't know where all of this was coming from. My thought was that maybe I had some oxygen deprivation due to the blood clots, and it had caused all of this somehow. At the time, it was my only explanation, and it was very depressing. I was devastated at the prospect that this current state could be the reality of the rest of my life. I couldn't keep doing this. I was becoming depressed, severely depressed. Quote, "The first time the disciple is consciously aware of it, the suffering is terrible, because it seems to be a final state. It is known as the ceremony of terror, and 2 stanzas of the birth litany belong to it. Litany 1. I am nothing, save as a fragment to be burned and consumed. 2. I alone am as nothing. Mabel Collins, When the Sun Moves Northward, The Way of Initiation." One night in December 2017, as my ears rang, I was sitting around as I took stock of my life, which I had pretty much done every day since my discharge from the hospital. As I pondered my life, my phone beeped. It was a text message from my older brother. He works as a middle school teacher, and we often text back and forth on a daily basis. I come from a very close family, and we were all still reeling from the loss of my younger brother in 2010 and my mother in 2015. My younger brother passed away after a 2-year-long battle with colon cancer at the age of 29. My mother passed away 5 years later. She had taken his death very hard, as we all did, and I believe it contributed to her own early demise. She died of heart failure due to complications with Addison's disease. Our family of 5 was now down to 3 in just 5 years, and had nearly gone down to 2 with my own death. I had just transferred to a new duty station at the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, D.C. I had only been there 6 months before I got sick, and was thinking things weren't off to a great start here. When I arrived in D.C., I didn't have much with me. I piled just a few belongings into my beat-up 13-year-old truck, and I drove to D.C. I found a furnished room in someone's house for $5.25 a month on Craigslist. It was my plan that this was just temporary for me. I would move into a house of my own and bring my dogs up here. I left them with a friend when I left for training several months before transferring. I was coming off yet another 3-year sea duty tour and a lengthy deployment during which my mother had passed away. But at least I wouldn't be going anywhere for the next 3 years. My thought was that maybe I would have the opportunity to work on me during this shore duty tour. We weren't a spiritual family growing up. In fact, we were proud and devout atheists. My father having been an astronomer teaching at a university for the past 30 years, and my mother a nurse. In our household, if it wasn't provable by science, then it didn't exist. My father was very interested in mythology, particularly as it pertains to the night sky, so Joseph Campbell was a household name growing up. I hadn't taken any real interest in mythology or spirituality, so I wasn't really sure what working on me meant. All I knew at this point was something had to happen. I was falling apart, no doubt a physical symptom of the issues I hadn't dealt with. I thought often about my brother, his illness and early death, my mother and her death. I missed them terribly, and not a day went by that I didn't think of them. I also often thought about how, following my brother's cancer diagnosis, the route that took me to and from work passed a large cemetery. I started taking a different route after his diagnosis. I couldn't face the fact that my younger brother might not survive, and passing the cemetery was a daily reminder of that. Before I had left my last command, I was sitting around talking to the junior guys I was in charge of when something unexpected slipped out. We were talking about how difficult military life is, and how to deal with its complete lack of frills and comfort. I was giving them advice, just little tidbits that had helped me cope along the way. I said, if you don't enjoy anything, then the Navy can't take anything from you. In fact, nobody can. When I said this, I immediately felt the awkwardness of it. It's not what they wanted to hear. So I added, you need to find something in this experience that you learn from, something that mentally will allow you to chalk this up as a win for you. After my conversation with them, I thought a lot about what I had said. I thought about how awful it sounded to say that if you don't enjoy anything, nobody could ever take anything from you. My thought was, what is wrong with me? Why don't I enjoy anything? I thought about how this was something I had always struggled with. Growing up, I always dreaded the first day of a class or the first day of school. Inevitably, there was always the routine of having to stand up in front of everyone and talk about who you are and what kinds of things you like to do. I would always struggle deeply with this. The truth is that there was nothing I enjoyed. My outlook on life also kept me from hating things as well. I began to think that I was really becoming a terrible person. I was starting to think that maybe I needed therapy. I did know there was one thing I hated. I hated my life. I hated everything about it. But how could I improve that feeling if there was nothing that I liked or enjoyed? I would wake up in the morning and my first thought was always, I hate my fucking life. I thought about going out and getting Mercedes or a Jaguar. I have money, a net worth like others do not, a good job, but I pictured myself crawling into that fancy, expensive car, pausing before I started it, and thinking once again, I hate my fucking life. At that point, I knew the fancy things weren't going to save me, and they didn't matter anyway. Something isn't right, I thought as I sat there. I looked down at my phone and read my brother's text message. As I was reading, the messages were coming in fast. He was clearly excited. He was texting me about a news article in the New York Times concerning a Pentagon UFO program. His next message stated that there was footage that had been released. The message after that stated that the former Senate Majority Leader, Harry Reid, was quoted in the article. I texted back and let him know that I would check it out. I secretly didn't want to have this conversation with him. My family always asked me about things they read or would see in the news concerning the military. I loved to impart my wisdom when they would ask me things, provided they didn't get into anything that I wasn't at liberty to discuss. This was something I thought I definitely wouldn't be able to discuss. I read the article and watched the footage. My heart sank into my stomach as I watched what is now referred to as the gimbal footage. I had seen it before, and was starting to become a bit emotional as it took me back to the memory of this experience. I knew my brother would be calling any minute to ask me about it. I was in a panic and my heart was pounding. I didn't know what I was going to tell him. I was thinking maybe I would just play it off. I went back to the article to try to make sense of why this had been released. Was it declassified? Could I talk about it? I had been present in the battle group when the footage was collected, and remember the incident as though it were yesterday. Until this point in my career, work had always been work. It was a place where I was a cool, calm, and collected professional above all else. I was happy to discuss generalities about the military, but when it came to anything I had actually seen or done, I would again speak in generalities or dodge the question completely. The nature of my job or its specific details were something I had never discussed with my family. For me, this incident was very different. It was inexplicably very emotional. I was reliving the first time I had seen this footage as this encounter was unfolding. I had found that the footage spoke to me on some level. As I studied it one day, I found tears were welling up in my eyes as though I knew something about this, but I didn't. I was unable to eat for several days, as my appetite had disappeared completely. At one point, the thought entered my head that I had brought them here. I was unable to shake this feeling because it was so powerful. This feeling grew stronger and more intense as the events unfolded. I remember feeling afraid to sleep. The feeling they were there for me was unsettling. I felt guilty about it and worried that I would be found out. These thoughts entered my head for some unknown reason. One day, I walked past a couple of the pilots who were talking about it. As I listened to them discussing it in passing, I looked down at the floor and tried to sneak past them without being noticed. I was shaking with fear that someone might find out that I had something to do with this. I couldn't understand this reaction I was having. It was nonsense. Yet the emotion was very real. How could I feel this way? Out of everything I had done in the military, this was an instance where I was having a lot of difficulty. For many years it was always in the back of my mind. At the time, I studied this footage extensively, looking for signs of propulsion, watching it over and over again, trying to make some sense of it. I remember driving home from work one day, listening to an NPR story about black holes, concerning the discovery that gravity existed in waves. It was proven by measuring the waves as two distant black holes collided. I then understood that's what the propulsion was. It was anti-gravitic. I was very aware of how communications worked. Communications also travel in waves. If you can broadcast on the same frequency as an unwanted signal with more power, you can block the unwanted signal. This discovery meant that you could essentially do the same thing with gravity. It was something that I thought about often. I never bothered to dig into the whole UFO thing, not because I didn't want to know, but rather because I didn't know where to start. There was so much garbage out there. Fake CGI videos, bogus abduction stories. It was a circus of tinfoil hats that I didn't want to follow down the rabbit hole. My phone started to ring. It was my brother. I had no idea what I was going to say. I let it ring a few times before I answered, because the prospect of discussing something that had to do with work on this level made me feel sick to my stomach. I answered the phone with the thought that maybe he wouldn't even mention it. Maybe he'll talk about something else first. "Hello," I said. He asked, "Hey, did you read the UFO article?" "Yeah, I read it. It's pretty interesting," I replied. "Have you ever encountered anything like that?" he asked. My esophagus was suddenly in a knot, and I started to choke. There was a long pause because I didn't know what to say. I was becoming emotional. I started to cough. My brother knows me very well, and I knew that he knew something was off about my reaction. I was so pissed in that moment that I had paused. I wondered in that instant why I couldn't have just played it off and not let on that I knew anything. I was so disappointed in myself. He asked, "Matthew, are you there?" "Yeah, I'm here," I replied. "Have you ever encountered anything like this?" he asked again. I thought about the article, thought about how Harry Reid had been quoted. This was all out there now, declassified. People were talking about it. I cleared my throat and choked a bit more. I was breathing very heavily, and my heart was pounding out of my chest. "Yes," I replied. "I was there in the battle group when this particular footage was collected." Now the pause was on his end. I don't really remember much about the rest of the conversation. He had a few questions. I had no answers because I didn't know anything more than he did. Several days passed before our next conversation. It was unlike him not to communicate for several days like this. I decided to call him. He answered the phone and sounded very down in the dumps. "What's wrong?" I asked. He stated, "Oh, just trying to take all this in." At this point, the major news networks were all running the story of the Pentagon's UFO program. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox were all running it. It was everywhere. We talked for a bit about an organization that was mentioned in the article called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science that my brother and I were going to look into. I was actually excited, and I visited their website in the hopes of finding some answers. I hadn't bothered looking into this before because I wasn't sure what was fact and what was fiction. But now I finally had a place to start. A place that had some association with the Pentagon. And for me, was sure to have more credibility than the grainy CGI videos and aluminum foil hats that were all over the internet. The first thing I came across was a launch video for To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science. As the video opened, there was a quote by Mark Twain up on the screen that read, "The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why." It was something that stood out in my mind. In front of the screen there was a stage with a seated panel. I saw that this panel was made up of heavy hitters at the Pentagon. I was sure this was all legitimate. In exploring the website for TTSA, I found that there were 2 books for sale. One was called Secret Machines Chasing Shadows by Tom DeLonge and A.J. Hartley, about the reverse engineering of alien tech by the government. And the other was called Gods, Men, and War by Tom DeLonge with Peter Levenda. I ordered them both, and I read them both. They made a lot of sense. God spoke a lot about consciousness, religion, shamanism, and mythology. It was interesting, but I didn't really understand where it was going. It also contained a phrase that I didn't really understand. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. I didn't fully understand what that meant at the time, but it was something that stood out to me as it is mentioned several times. Years ago, I watched a show on TV about otherworldly encounters. In the show, there was an interview with an airline pilot who was flying around what we now call Area 51. He claimed he was diverted around the base by air traffic control. He made his course corrections, glanced out the window, and saw what he described as fireflies lighting up in the sky around the base. He saw a giant landing strip illuminate on the ground as these fireflies zipped in at incredible speeds towards the runway one by one. At the time, I didn't think much of his experience, but now, in light of the books I read, I was starting to think about it differently. In an interview with Joe Rogan, Tom DeLonge mentioned he was detained and questioned by the government about the book. In reading and hearing these things, I was very excited. In the interview, Tom DeLonge mentions how Greek mythology plays some role in this, but he was very vague about it. He talked about how the wreckage at Roswell had the word freedom on it in ancient Greek. My reaction to hearing this was mixed. Freedom from what? What, was there some kind of war going on? Were there slave races out there that were fighting for freedom? Or was Tom DeLonge just a crazy nut? What was going on? I tried to look a bit into Greek mythology at this point, but quickly discovered that it's so complex that you could honestly get a PhD in Greek mythology and still not completely understand it. In looking this stuff up, however, I found the writings of Plato and Democritus interesting. In looking at mythology, I was taken off on this internet tangent, and I began watching some documentary about Angkor Wat in Cambodia. There is a bas relief that runs along an entire wall of the complex called the Churning of the Sea of Milk. It depicts an important part of Hindu mythology and explains the process of the origination of Amrita, which is the nectar of immortality. It depicts the Hindu gods churning the Sea of Milk, or Milky Way, in the making of this nectar of immortality. At one point, the gods begin to fight over the nectar. A bit of this nectar spills and hits various places. Some of it hits Earth. I thought it was a neat story in terms of human mythology, but I felt like I was getting sidetracked. Although I thought it was incredibly interesting to be looking into all of this mythology that was impossible to grasp because of its infinite complexity. On the website for TTSA, there was a quote from one of its members, Steve Justice, about the changes this stuff will bring about for humanity, stating, "Revolutionary is too mild a word." This is what appealed to me. It was hopeful, and I loved it. I was so happy that this was finally coming out into the public sphere. It means so many things. New energy technology, new propulsion. It could truly revolutionize the way we live our lives. All of those things are wonderful and truly revolutionary, but what made it appealing to me was what it would mean for humanity going forward. I began to comb through the staff that was listed on the TTSA website to see if any of these individuals wrote any books in the past. I came across Dr. Colm Kelleher, which led me to a book he wrote called Hunt for the Skinwalker. As I read, it all seemed pretty unbelievable and creepy at the same time, but I couldn't deny the credibility of the people involved. The book seemed to imply that what we call paranormal was somehow linked to all of this. It seemed the more I read, the more I realized that all of this stuff was already out there in the public sphere. Still, there was a part of me that was skeptical. Okay, so some of this stuff, it turns out, is true, but there's no way all of it's true, I thought. Another source for me was Jacques Vallée, as he had written the foreword for Volume 1 of God's Man and War. I read The Invisible College and Confrontations, both authored by Vallée. All of these books were a wealth of knowledge. I was reading things that I had thought existed only in the realm of tinfoil hats. Stories of abduction, the loss of control of one's body, the feelings of an urge to get in your car and drive, feeling paralyzed as aliens conduct experiments on you. There were so many interesting abduction stories and confrontations, but there were two that stood out to me as being particularly interesting for some reason. One of the accounts was that of Sergeant Herbert Schirmer, who was on patrol near Ashland, Nebraska at 2:30 a.m. on December 3, 1967. The part of the story that sent a chill through me was the following. Quote, Schirmer recalled being taken out of the patrol car, unable to use his radio or his gun. He was given a tour of the saucer. The operator asked him, "Are you the watchman over this place?" And when they reached the top of the craft, the man told Schirmer, "Watchman, someday you will see the universe." Unquote. This stood out to me because it seemed so profoundly poetic. But it didn't make sense. Poetic, yet it was nonsense, as it was 1967 and no human would be exploring the universe with the technology we possessed at that time. It's not like Sergeant Schirmer was some kind of astronaut. He was a police officer. He wasn't even in the right field to be exploring the universe, even if it were possible. The other account that stood out is in the next chapter of Confrontations, called Happy Camp. The account is as follows. Quote, the main event took place 5 days later, on November 2nd, 1975, when the same principals, Steve, Stan, and Helen, and 2 other people drove down a dirt trail into the canyon at the base of Cade Mountain. They were still trying to find an explanation for what they had seen earlier, and they explored the area in more or less systematic fashion. In the canyon, however, they found an area of heavy fog that forced them to turn back, and they became very confused about subsequent events. They remember heavy boulders falling off the cliffs and bouncing around the truck. They remember the door locks being opened and a strange being telling Steve, "You won't need that," when he reached for his gun. They believe they saw a hovering object. Helen recalls being lifted inside a room, but she is confused about the time sequence. One occupant had a dialogue with her, in the course of which he described a transparent object as being made of gold. Helen answered that she knew what gold was like, and it surely was not transparent. The being answered simply, "There is such a thing as gold that you can look through. It's in your Bible." Steve thinks he was in a craft with a transparent window on top and bottom, through which he was able to see China Mountain. Their next conscious memory is of driving down the mountain, singing a chorus of an old church song. I find it interesting that the hymn they were singing was, "There is power in the blood of the Lamb." Unquote. It struck me as an odd encounter because of the whole gold description. And why would this being tell her it's in her Bible? What's that all about? As a devout atheist, I found it intriguing, yet incredibly disturbing at the same time. Intriguing because it was coming from an otherworldly being, but disturbing that he would bring up the Bible. In doing so, it occurred to me that he could be misinterpreted to be endorsing one religion over another. To me, all religions are nonsense, so I found it disgusting that such a being would even mention this. I decided to look into this because that prospect seemed so awful to me. It also struck me as odd that some being from some other place in the universe would have such an immediate and intimate knowledge of something like the human Bible or even the English language. I looked for the part of the Bible that was referenced by this being and found it in Revelation 21, in the King James Version of the Bible. The New Jerusalem. Verse 9. And there came unto me one of the 7 angels, which had the 7 vials full of the 7 last plagues, and talked with me, saying, Come hither, I will show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. Verse 10. And he carried me away in the Spirit to a great and high mountain, and showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God. Verse 11. Having the glory of God, and her light was like unto a stone most precious, even like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. Verse 12. And had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates, and at the gates 12 angels, and names written thereon, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. Verse 13. On the east 3 gates, on the north 3 gates, on the south 3 gates, and on the west 3 gates. Verse 14. And the wall of the city had 12 foundations, and in them the names of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Verse 15. And he that talked with me had a golden reed to measure the city, and the gates thereof, and the wall thereof. Verse 16. And the city lieth foursquare, and the length is as large as the breadth. And he measured the city with the reed, 12,000 furlongs. The length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. Verse 17. And he measured the wall thereof, 144 cubits, according to the measure of a man, that is, of the angel. Verse 18. And the building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. Verse 19. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third a chalcedony, the fourth an emerald. Verse 20. The fifth sardonyx, the sixth sardius, the seventh chrysolite, the eighth beryl, the ninth a topaz, the 10th a chrysoprasus, the 11th a jacinth, the 12th an amethyst. Verse 21. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of 1 pearl, and the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. Verse 22. And I saw no temple therein, for the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. Verse 23. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. Verse 24. And the nations of them which are saved shall walk in the light of it, and the kings of the earth do bring their glory and honor into it. Verse 25. And the gates of it shall not be shut at all by day, for there shall be no night there. Verse 26. And they shall bring the glory and honor of the nations into it. Verse 27. And there shall in no wise enter into it anything that defileth, neither whatsoever worketh abomination or maketh a lie, but they which are written in the Lamb's book of life. Unquote. It was clear to me in reading this that it was referring to a cube-shaped craft of some kind. Perhaps this is why the being had mentioned it during the abduction experience. Perhaps this part of the Bible describes an otherworldly encounter, and the author didn't understand what he was looking at thousands of years ago. It seemed a little less creepy to me now. This was just an example of someone encountering a cube-shaped craft in antiquity and not having the vocabulary to describe what he was seeing. I still wasn't sure about why they would be singing "Power in the Blood of the Lamb." Perhaps mentioning the Bible made them think this was a religious experience of some kind. In Confrontations, Vallée includes a list where he classifies anomalies related to UFOs or UAPs, as they are now called. It includes lasting side effects, physical effects, reality transformations, and injury. He lays this out in a chapter called "The Price of Contact." Vallée states, quote, "My own private conjecture, which deviates considerably from the accepted dogma among UFO believers, is that we are dealing with a yet unrecognized level of consciousness, independent of man but closely linked to the earth." Unquote. I went online looking for other sources and came across a YouTube video of an experiencer named Susie Hansen. In it, she claimed all kinds of crazy things: abductions, tests, being allowed to pilot ET craft. It seemed like the type of madness that the internet was full of when it comes to this subject. At the end of her presentation, she began crying and talking about the spiritual aspect of this. I didn't want to pursue anything like that. I needed credible sources. The things she was claiming were way too out there for me. I was online one night combing through some stuff and came across an experiencer checklist. I knew it probably carried little credibility, but decided to open it just out of curiosity. I sat there reading this, and to my surprise, I started to feel very uneasy. Some of the questions seemed very familiar to me. It mentioned blood type, blood clots, nightmares, hyperparanoia at night, and Addison's disease. It said that Addison's disease was a side effect of the constant tapping of the adrenal gland. This caused the gland to begin to not function properly over time. I had opened this with the expectation that it would have nothing to do with me, or at the very least, I thought I would get a good laugh out of it. I choked as I realized it had everything to do with me, and my stomach sank. "No," I said softly as I looked up at nothing in particular off in the distance. I was trying to wrap my mind around this. "No, it can't be," I said aloud to myself. I looked down at my hands as they started to shake. My heart started pounding. I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew it was true. I was worried. At one point, I came across Dr. Stephen Greer in a YouTube video. He was taking people out to the desert and meditating. In this meditation, he would have people project themselves astrally and ask for assistance. I saw one video where he was able to make craft appear in doing this. In another video, I saw Tom DeLonge talking about his experience in doing this with Dr. Greer. It seems to work, so I decided to give it a try. I lied down in the bed of my truck one night and followed Dr. Greer's instructions. I asked for help in understanding what this was all about. I wanted to do something that would benefit the human race. I was very careful. I did just as he suggests. I did this with love in my heart. As I did the meditation, I was tearing up a bit. It seemed a bit corny. It was in fact the first time I had ever meditated, and it was surprisingly relaxing. I was, however, not surprised when nothing happened, but was a bit disappointed as I thought I had really tried. I figured if they had been abducting me, I deserved answers. I began to think they were responsible for the death of my mother, possibly the death of my brother, and they had almost killed me with blood clots. I demanded answers, and I was determined to get to the bottom of this. At the time, I even told my brother that I knew I would never be able to let this go until I knew the truth. On the night of February 14th, 2018, I was sitting in my truck having a smoke before I went to bed, running out of options for credible sources. I remembered reading at the end of Secret Machines about some tablets. Ancient tablets that were held in a glowing sapphire metal frame. It was a bit of a cliffhanger, as that is where the book ended, without telling the readers what these tablets were and why they are significant. When I looked up ancient sapphire tablets, the first thing that popped up was the 10 Commandments. I was pretty disappointed. My immediate thought was, it can't be the 10 Commandments, that's just the corniest thing I've ever heard. I began looking up ancient tablets of all kinds. I came across the Tabula Smaragdina, or Emerald Tablet. I began reading about it. This tablet is what gave birth to alchemy in the Middle Ages. When I read that, my thought was, well, alchemy is just what became modern-day chemistry. Or at least that was my idea of what alchemy was. It seemed interesting, although they were the wrong color, green as opposed to blue, as described in Secret Machines. I found translations of the tablet on a Wikipedia page. One was Isaac Newton's translation into English. My immediate sense was that this was just internet conspiracy theory nonsense. But I was forced to rethink that theory when I found a digital image of the translation in Isaac Newton's own handwriting at a major university. The text is as follows. Quote, "'Tis true without lying, certain and most true. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below, to do the miracles of one only thing." And as all things have been and arose from one by the meditation of one, so all things have their birth from this one thing by adaptation. The sun is its father, the moon its mother. The wind hath carried it in its belly. The earth is its nurse. The father of all perfection in the whole world is here. Its force or power is entire if it be converted into earth. Separate thou the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, sweetly, with great industry. It ascends to the earth from the heaven, and again it descends to the earth, and receives the force of things superior and inferior. By this means you shall have the glory of the whole world, and thereby all obscurity shall fly from you. Its force is above all force, for it vanquishes every subtle thing and penetrates every solid thing. So was the world created. From this are and do come admirable adaptations, whereof the means or process is here in this. Hence I am called Hermes Trismegistus, having the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world. That which I have said of the operation of the sun is accomplished and ended. Unquote. In reading this, I didn't understand how this gave birth to what I thought alchemy was. It seemed to speak to something other than turning base metals into gold. I was shocked at the realization that of Isaac Newton's personal papers, the majority of them were writings about the study of theology and alchemy. The Emerald Tablet also contained the as above, so below text that I remember reading in Tom DeLonge's book. I didn't at the time understand it as I do now, but I did know at the time it was significant. Isaac Newton was the father of so much in the way of science. He was a genius, so why would he be investigating something like this? I had a kind of emotional response to reading his translation. It smacked of some kind of truth, but what? It was clearly cloaked in some esoteric meaning. I looked for books concerning Hermes and ran into Hermetic teachings. The first book I came across was a book called The Kybalion by 3 initiates. As I was sitting there in my truck smoking, looking all of this stuff up on my phone, I looked up in contemplation of all of this. I let my eyes wander across the backyard. I was parked in front of the 3-foot chain link fence that enclosed the backyard. The previous owners of this house kept horses, and there is an old stable off in the distance toward the back of the property. In the doorway of the stable, I saw a shadow. It looked like a very tall, thin, all-white person that was bending down to look out through the doorway. I found myself fixated on this figure I was seeing, trying to make sense of it. I suppose I could have turned on my headlights to see what was going on, but I didn't. In the end, I figured it was just light playing with my eyes. I looked back down and read the synopsis of The Kybalion on my phone. I wasn't impressed. It seemed a bit out there. In the synopsis, I read about the 7 universal principles it covered. It spoke to the fact that there is no such thing as chance, and that everything happens for a reason. There is only cause and effect. I read about how people have a hard time with this because it implies we have no free will. I definitely wasn't going to read it. It just didn't speak to me, so this was a dead end. I wondered if there was a chapter of MUFON here in Maryland, as I was eager to dig into this stuff. I was finding posts and activities listed under MUFON Maryland that were a decade old. It didn't seem to me that there was an active chapter in the area, so this was again another dead end. I felt at this time that I was out of options for credible sources. I was still sitting in my truck, and it was getting late. I decided to go to bed, as I had to get up early in the morning for an appointment I had in Patuxent River. It was an hour and some change south one way, so that meant over 2 hours driving the next day. I resigned myself to the fact that I would just have to wait for more releases of information from TTSA. I decided with that I would call it a night and went to bed, ignorantly unaware that the next day my life was going to change forever. In my hubris, I decided that the Kybalion was something I could dismiss and brush aside, just as I had done with so many things up to this point. The experiences of people like Susie Hansen and the Kybalion were nonsense to me. The next day, the universe would begin to bear down on me with all its weight, in an absolutely terrifying demonstration of the Kybalion's principles, just for me.